is for friends.
I thought this music was so epic.
We all like talking about gaming. The only thing that I disliked about the old game. There are so many different conversations started by gaming.
Oh, I forgot I have you.
This could be anything. Okay, walk in that green goo. Oh, nope. That's a no. Anything Gaming Podcast. Hi, welcome to Anything Gaming. I'm Ant. That's Woody. This is episode 2. What do we have on today's show, Woody?
Oh, this is great. Well, we got a big news story to cover. We're also going to be covering, as the thumbnail suggests, not only just bad controllers themselves, but just like little controller quirks, you know, just things that we all deal with, especially when we're playing with one of these things. And I appreciate the Atari Jaguar shout out there. We'll get into that one definitely. Also, we're going to be talking about the weird, connection between games that are transformed into movies and reverse movies that become games when one outdoes the other, or if they're both really good, or occasionally they both are just terrible.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun kind of show. There was lots of comments last week, so if you guys want to put some comments in, we'll get to them through the show as well. Or if you're watching this in replay later on, put it in the comments and we'll get to it the next week. Mm-hmm. Anyway, let's get some news started off because there's some big stuff coming out of the Xbox world.
Right, this just landed just shortly after, God, how many years now? More than a decade, way more than a decade.
It's nearly 20 years.
I know, it's such a milestone. The Xbox 360 store shutting down. I want to say it was July of 2024. So yes. There's still quite a ways. There's still a good 11 months between now and then to pick up some stuff that maybe isn't backwards compatible with the one or the series. But man, I mean, I just think of what that service did for me as a gamer. Up until then, I'm not a PC guy. I was strictly console, so I did not understand the concept of downloading a game on your console and playing it just off drive. You know what I mean? That was mind blowing to me. I remember the first thing I downloaded was Marble Blast Ultra, which was a crappy Monkey Ball ripoff in hindsight, but it was super fun. You know, it just a lot of games are just aren't going to be available anymore.
Well, I credit the Xbox Arcade as it was back then as kind of the early way for people to kind of get into indie games and some of these underground games that you could only get on PC up until this time. Things like Super Meat Boy, Limbo,
Inside, these odd games that you wouldn't play unless they were out for there because they would just pop right in the store and you'd get it. It was great.
Yeah. Well, up until that point, games were either AAA and they were a $60 game, or they were free, but very rarely they were free. But there was no kind of in between $20 games that were fun for everyone to go and play, and that's what Xbox Arcade did really well. And you just mentioned it before to me that Xbox Arcade actually had the coin. So you didn't, when you started off, you bought points to get into the Xbox Arcade. And so you'd have to transfer your money over to points and then you could buy games or whatever. So it made it really confusing because I think $10 was 15,000 points or something like that, just so you didn't know how much you were spending in this store.
I was able to convert really easy because back in the day, and to an extent today even, I was hooked on Rock Band. I loved Rock Band. I started actually playing real drums because of Rock Band. And I remember it'd be 160 points for a song, for a main song. But if it was from an indie band or a smaller source, it'd be 80 points. Now the 160 would be $2 American, but 80 would be $1 American. And using that, I was able to be anytime I saw a DLC, I just knew that 800 points was $10. Stuff like that. It would just instantly click, And that was the early stages of the Xbox store. It was cute, but then the Wii actually had something similar, but it was kind of stupid. $20 was quite literally 2,000 points. So it was easy to it was 2,000 pennies. You know what I mean? That's how it worked. So it was easy to do with that. But Microsoft just made it that much little more difficult.
They sure did. And also, you've got to think that these stores actually brought up the now hated DLC. That up until then, you bought a game and you just got a game. Now, then once this came about, this was the game had the extras, and you had to pay extra. So
one of the games that actually it was one of the games where I really heavily invested in DLC for was Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 4. And, you got the Shivering Isles and the Mehun's dagger or whatever. And it was great. But they released this horse armor that all it was dress up your horse in armor. I don't even think it even buffed your stats. I think it still was just a horse that would die if you hit it enough times.
Yeah.
And it was $5 for the horse armor. And for the time, people were like, what? Like $5 for what? Of course, nowadays, that's quaint nowadays with some microtransactions, as we covered in last week's episode. But I remember that being a big point of contention. That was actually something I didn't get out of principle. I got everything else. Of course, then I got the Game of the Year edition, which included anyway. But but that was really my first foray into the DLC world. I'd go into a store, in store, downloading it. It was cool. I see now what the PC people were talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Now, so there's around about 2,100 games on the Xbox 360 store, and about 600 and a bit have made it through to the Series consoles, Series X, Series S, and Xbox One. So it's not all bad news. So if you have bought some of the more popular games that are on the Xbox 360 store will be still available to play. They're just not all of them, not all the little really weird different ones.
Yeah, but and that's good, in a popularity sense. Like the 360 games you'll think of, it's probably on there. But like you said, there were a lot of indie games that got their first push onto the 360. And the game that I explained that to you, Marble Blast Ultra earlier, that's not even on the store anymore.
Really?
That's gone. I actually I went a couple years without a 360. So when I finally got the 360, I was put it online. All right, let's see what's there that I can't get on my one. And I looked for Marble Blast and I couldn't find it. I ended up getting Vigilante 8. It was kind of like a soft reboot, and pretty soon you got about 11 months to download that if you want to. And I got the 360 version of Duke Nukem, even though I had the newer Xbox One version because I just love Duke Nukem. It's one of my favorite games. Yeah. So I have a feeling that a lot of those indie games you're not going to see anymore.
Oh, I wonder, though, if Xbox has given themselves a little bit of a timeline to kind of maybe get up to 1,000, get half the games over. Because Xbox has been really proud about how many games they've got from older games that they've brought through, and kind of give it to PlayStation all the time. Hey, we keep on bringing old games through because they do know that gamers are attached to their old games.
Yeah. I mean, they're what you grow up. They're what you learn. They're what you base your memories off of. So, and I wasn't a little kid when the store came out. I was in my early 20s, but even then, I was still a very impressionable dude. With all this new universe coming in with all these games. So, it's good that a lot of them are still available for the Series X or S and the One. There's plenty of 360 games. I got Symphony of the Night. I got their version of Sonic CD, Super Meat Boy, as you mentioned, and these are games that I want to keep, on my system some way or form.
Well. Lastly, on this subject, it kind of makes me think about what is the future of games, because all the consoles are pushing us towards this digital world. And if we have a PlayStation 4 and we've spent hundreds of dollars on that PlayStation 4 store, in 20 years that shuts down and you can't ever access those games again. Where does I think Xbox is moving towards an ecosystem that is basically forever. And if the games become old and deleted, they might remove them if they don't work, but mostly trying to keep the games as in the longest possible life cycle, because that's what gamers like.
Yeah, it's gonna have to. I hate to say it because it kind of runs into emulation and piracy, but it's got to be up to just like the people to keep these games alive
Mm,
one way or another, however they do it. And I'm not the biggest fan of emulation. I get the appeal, you know. I mean, if I want to play, the Japanese version of a game I got, emulate it. You know what I mean? Because
yeah.
it's better than going through the holes. But if they're straight out like erasing a game, literally, then I think that like I don't see any moral or ethical objection to taking that game and find a way to save it for the future. Because if one person liked that game, if that one game made a person into a gamer that experienced all these other games, absolutely should be preserved.
Yeah. I would also say that PSP did a really good job at everyone was jailbreaking their PSPs so they could get their pirated and emulated games onto it. So then the last update that PSP did kind of was like here you go, we're going to unlock everything so you guys can keep this dream and life together, and we're going to move on from here. You know what I mean? And it's all up to you guys now. And that was their kind of final hurrah. So maybe Xbox 360 will do a similar type of thing. You don't know.
I hope so. I hope so because and the culture's still growing to this day. The Xbox online present hasn't ended, but it was just such a significant chapter that it is kind of a little sad to see it go. I mean, anytime an online service goes, the Wii U service just went just a little while ago. That was I was very disappointed in that. I still play my Wii U constantly. I was playing Mario RPG on it just about 2 weeks ago. The Wii store itself has been gone for a long time. It's just something that we're gonna have to get used to. There's gonna come a day where you won't be able to go online with your PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
Like it's far off in the distance, but it's gonna happen.
Oh, well, I would like to also bring into this is moving on to the next bit, which is still Xbox related. So Xbox Series S, so PlayStation brought out let's start at the start with this story. PlayStation brought out the digital version and the non-digital version of the PlayStation 5. Both of these have pretty much the same specs, except one's missing a disk drive, right?
Right.
Xbox went a different way. They brought out a Series S, which is missing the disk drive, but it's also got a smaller graphics card and a smaller CPU. It's nowhere near as powerful as the Series X, which is more powerful than the PlayStation 5, but also has a disk drive. So a lot of developers have been complaining about this. They kind of, we can put it onto Series X easily because it's way powerful than the PlayStation, but to put it onto the Series S, that's actually a challenge. And this is actually causing like a few dramas for Xbox because people the developers are like, can we just put it onto one and not the other? And Xbox like, no, if you want to release a game for Xbox Series, it has to be for both. What this is doing is like Baldur's Gate 3, which has just been dubbed the highest rating PC game of all time, will be released onto PlayStation before Xbox because the developers can't work out how to make it run on the Series S. So Xbox is essentially making their games harder, making it harder to release games on the console, and then making time delays just because of the difficulties to release on these consoles. What are your thoughts on all of this?
It's a story as old as time. That's been going on for a while. We can make it for this console, but with this console, it's going to have to wait. More than half the time, it's usually because of exclusivity, licensing and stuff like that. But it does happen because of technical issues. Going back to what you said earlier, I'm not huge onto digital-only consoles, but I thought it was a stupid move what they did with the Series S, making it not as powerful as the Series X. I think their theory on that was if you don't get digital media, I mean, if you don't get the physical copy, you're probably not a hardcore gamer. But That's not the truth at all. I know plenty of people who hard into games, who want the best, fastest, all that, and they demand it. And they don't buy a single disc. They completely just download it. I don't think that had anything to do with it. So I don't understand why they nerfed the Series S. Yeah, and
I think there's a bit of a misconception here for starters. I think it's developers being a little bit lazy because it's easy. The PlayStation's easy. It's more powerful, so you don't have to optimize your game as much.
Right.
Where the Series S, it's only putting out at I think 1080p. It's not putting out at 4K, so it doesn't technically need the greatest graphics card because doesn't have to run at that speed. But it has the same CPU as what the PlayStation has. So technically, it shouldn't be. The RAM is probably the biggest issue, but technically it shouldn't be that hard to kind of make it work for the Series S. It's just a little bit of optimization on the developer's side. So I think it's a little bit of laziness and, hey, we'll just do the easy one first. And I see that point, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's other factors, how long it takes, cost effectiveness. Making the best and brightest is going to cost more money than not making the best and brightest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that is just another, layer on that. And as you said too, laziness can be part of it as well. You'd see it back in the day. You would play like, oh, the Super Nintendo version of this is great, or no, the Genesis version of this is great, and then you look at the other version, and it's like, ugh, what went wrong? Who else moved? Of course, back then, another problem was sometimes like the game would be completely even though it's the same game, it would be ported by different parties, and then it was up to them to bring it to that console. You don't see too much of that now. I think the developers really tighten their stuff down, that it's them putting it on the console. The last time I heard about any of that happened, it was Orange Box for PS3, and that didn't work out too well. So it's good that they have more control over it, but it'd be nice if there was more, like you said, less laziness, less corner cutting, if you will.
Yeah, always the dollar.
Yeah, hey,
always
cash rules everything around us. That's how it goes.
So have we got anything else for the news, or are we out of news cycle for today?
Well, one cool. This is more of a follow-up for not so much last week, but this is a follow-up, a preview of what's coming up tomorrow in the States. Red Dead Redemption comes out for PS4 and Switch. Speaking of optimization, yeah, I don't know whether or not I'm gonna get it yet. Again, I don't. I just I got it on the 360, and it's like the game of the year, super with all the DLC, because better get it now before it goes away. Edition of it. In fact, that could be part of Red Dead coming out. Just the fact that the 360 store is dying off. The PS3 can't be far behind it, so that generation's gonna come over quick to the next one.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah. But that's more of where we'll be going more into remasters in the future.
Yeah, let's do that in another episode. I think that'll be fun. I like remastering.
Oh yeah, it's fun. It's great.
So what are we doing? What's the next subject? What are we on to? Where are we moving?
Well, we were gonna talk. I think we should just dive right into the thumbnail, and where we're talking about bad controllers. Maybe not necessarily bad controllers, but just controllers that we literally cannot wrap ourselves around.
Well, you
like
started with Red Dead Redemption, and you were telling me about this the other day, and I said my biggest hate from this game, the Red Dead Redemption series, is the button schematics are terrible for me. I just hate how they put them. They put all the buttons all back to front and around everywhere else, and there should be a set logic of buttons. There should be a trigger. Right trigger is shoot the gun. Like you've got the B is reload if you're going with an Xbox controller. And then it should be A should be always jump on an Xbox controller. And then you have problems like Nintendo that puts A and B back to front. So then does the developer put it where you would use it on the other side of the world, or you know what I mean? There's lots of different problems like that, and that's why we started this.
See, and that's why I'm a little worried about getting Red Dead for the Switch, because that's going to be a Nintendo controller. So they're going to be flipping some stuff around because B and A, Y and X. I mean, that's just usually what they do. At least with the menus, which is going to be confusing. But it's one of those situations where, you know, and Red Dead's not that old. You know, it's only about 10 years old. GTA is more or less based on a lot of third-person, you know, shooter adventures are based off the GTA controls. I can't think of a single game where you don't press triangle or Y, depending on your main controller choice, to board a vehicle, get on something that will ride you somewhere. You know, and that's one of those things that Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead's in that family kind of more or less imprinted on us. It doesn't matter if you're playing Saints Row. If you play Saints Row, it's still that button. You know? Yeah. I want to say there might be that button in Cyberpunk. I didn't play Cyberpunk for too long, but to get into your car, I think it might have been that button. I think you hold it down and then you get in or something like that. It could be A, now that I think of it, though.
Well, I was always triangle on PlayStation. What's that? Y on an Xbox controller for to get in.
Or X if you're playing on the Nintendo now. Yeah. So, yeah, it never ends.
And then if you go to mouse and keyboard, and I can't work this out because I'm always a AWSD kind of guy. And then it was only recently that I met some friends that actually use the arrow keys and prefer arrow keys, and that's been mind-boggling to my little brain that people use the arrow keys.
I want to say it was Redneck Rampage. I just downloaded a game off Steam. It could be another. It could be Rise of the Triad, which we talked about earlier. But it's an old boomer shooter, and I had to, you know, come over here and put them because here's the arrow keys and here's the mouse. Normally I like to have some room, but now I got to come over here to get used to it. And your brain does snap to it because, you know, that's how I played, you know, Quake and Duke Nukem back in '97. So, you know, you get back to it. But just like coming over here to the WASD is just so much better. I'm still a novice when it comes to PC controls. I'm much more comfortable with the controller. But, you know, if my, you know, ideal control for mouse and keyboard would be the WASD.
I bought one of these things like that I can use for controlling, right? So you put all your PC controls into that, and you can use it as a. No, not that.
This is mine. This is my PC.
So then I can put it in. So then I can use the thumbstick for moving around because I hate moving around with a WASD. I think thumbsticks are more intuitive. I get why people like shooter games with a mouse,
right? Yeah,
because it's easier to line up with a mouse. But moving around WASD is not my favorite.
See, for me, it would be if it's just a game where all you do is move and do actions, whether it be shoot or punch. Then I'm comfortable. But if there's like a lot of items, if there's a lot of actions, it's hard for me to comprehend as a console peasant. It's just hard for me. But I try.
So what was your worst controller over the years? What controller did you dislike the most?
All right. So the one I dislike the most actually is one of those instances where you think you're really cool and like cutting edge. When I got my Saturn, it didn't come with any wires at all. It didn't come with any wires, didn't come with any controllers. Now, the Saturn controller, for the most part, like the basic controller, looks like a really cool, slick Genesis controller. A little bigger, 6-button, you know, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and 2 shoulders. And it's a cool controller. It's a great controller. But I want it to be cool. And I went on eBay and I found the Sega Saturn 3D controllers. Which were kind of shit. It's kind of like if a Dreamcast controller and if the Xbox Duke controller had a baby. It was just a big, bulky thing. But it had this analog stick, more like an analog slider. But it had an analog stick on top. And I was like, wow, this is going to be cool. I played Duke Nukem with it, and I was like, woof. This is rough. Just like the controller is just so big and bulky, and it feels really cheap compared to a regular Saturn controller, too. That's a big thing. If a controller's a little too light, it doesn't, like, I'd rather have a heavy hit you in the head and get knocked out kind of controller than a really light controller. So I would say that's probably the worst controller I've actually ever experienced. If you want to go further back, though, you got to give homage and, a tip of the hat to the old Gen 2 controllers, like the Intellivision controller, which is hardwired onto the system. Looks like a phone, and I mean a phone.
Really?
Yeah, numbers. It had this. It's got a disc that is used for movement, and you can also push it. Actually, it's quite ahead of its time. You actually push the movement stick in, not unlike the L3R3 buttons of today. So it's cool. And then there were 2 buttons on the side of this thing. It's in the shape of a remote control. And it's got the numeric buttons like a phone, and it's also hardwired to the system.
Oh, so you could never replace that controller unless you
have to call up. You'd have to call up Mattel. I don't think the number works anymore, but you have to call up Mattel and have them send you a repair kit, and then you actually have to repair it yourself.
I remember. Okay, I'm going to pick on the Atari controller, the original one that had the little stick. And then it had the little base on it, because Atari, it was one of the first consoles that actually brought out different controllers depending on what games you played. So you would have you could have a pad there, which is just like a normal gamepad, like a Nintendo, or if you swapped over to a different game, you would have to it would force you, I'm pretty sure, to swap controllers depending on the game that you were playing. You could only play some games with some controllers. And the one that had the little stick and the little base pad, I just remember how annoying it was when I'd push forward and then the whole controller would slip over and I'd punch my hand into the table or the floor. And that I just disliked that. And I can understand why that didn't take off except for flight simulator kind of games.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, it was a case of overambition, but, that's how you move forward.
Yeah.
You look at that. That's the DNA today of I don't know. Honestly, you can make the correlation between that and some of the more advanced PS5 controllers that are out there today. Some of them were bad. The roller one wasn't that great. It was literally a ball that you would have to move your character with, and it just never worked right.
It was like an upside down mouse.
Right. Yeah. And then there was one that was a stick with a dial on it. I don't even know what you use that for. I just stuck with the 1-button stick combo. If I couldn't do that, that was beyond my pay grade. And a lot of these controllers would be considered, bad controllers because a lot of them didn't work right, if at all. And even if it did work right, it was only with 2 or 3 games, as opposed to the regular controller that could work with all the games and be way more comfortable.
And now we seem to have kind of ended up where the controllers are all the same. But before we got to that point in time, we had the Nintendo 64 controller. And I'm not sure how many people had 4 hands or whatever it was required to operate that controller properly. But
it wasn't just that, too. It's just the Nintendo 64 controller rewrote how controls work in a video game. I remember renting Turok Dinosaur Hunter.
Right.
And I was excited because the way I was just getting into first-person shooters because they were all on the PC. If you were a console gamer, you really didn't get too many. So here's this fully polygonal, looking around game where you fight dinosaurs and robots and stuff. I was thrilled. I remember getting it home, threw it in, grabbed my Nintendo 64 controller, hit the button. You get that little cutscene, and then the game starts. I remember this as if it was yesterday. I pushed forward on the stick, ready to walk out into my adventure. My character looked straight down at his legs. I was like, how do you move? That's the stick, that's the button. And then I'm pushing around and I press the C up button and my character walks a little. I'm having him walk with a button, not with a stick, not with a D-pad, but with the buttons themselves. It was mind-blowing. I remember that so vividly and clearly. Even today, if I fire up Turok on my PC, on one of the systems, I can't help but think about that. That's really what broke me into, all right, controllers are getting kind of advanced now, and you're going to have to keep up. And I did, because the Quake 1 and 2 had those controls. The South Park game had those controls. There were a lot of games where now you're not moving with the stick anymore. Now it's could be any button. It blew my mind that you could just do that, just assign buttons to different things. Back then, at least.
Well, a lot of the first person or third person even games would have a static camera, so you would just control the movement of the character, and then the camera would follow the character as required. And this was before analog sticks, and you had 2 sticks. It was often just 1 stick. And so people like my wife was a mad Tomb Raider player, and she used to play it like. And then they brought out the next Tomb Raider where you needed to control the camera. She just couldn't do it. That's when gaming stopped for her. And
actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually recently played Tomb Raider 2, and I remember that you have to. It's like you hold the R1 button and then you move the. It's one of those combinations where you hold the button, then you move around, and you can look around and move the camera. But it has not aged well.
No, that has not aged well. No. But we have got like some good controller. Like I think the best controller now is a PlayStation 5. And I think the most underrated controller right now is a Nintendo Pro controller. I think it's better than the Xbox Series controller. Basically because it has rechargeable batteries. We're not like living in 2001 now where we have to put batteries in the controller. When is Xbox going to realize that rechargeable batteries are a thing? And also I feel like the Xbox controller is the most flimsy of all the controllers out there on the market.
It feels like that. You're right. I mean, if you were to like, the problem is you kind of touched on is a lot of the controllers feel a lot same between the consoles as compared to other generations. But with the PlayStation 5, you just know you're holding a much more robust controller. You know, just the general feel. You don't even have to lift it up. Just feel it. You feel solid. The Pro controller's not that far behind it. And you are right. The Pro controller is a very underrated controller. Whereas with the Xbox controller, I don't know. Maybe they're just going for more like aerodynamic design or something, but it feels so light.
It feels like an Xbox One controller, but they've put a little bit of grip tape to the side of it.
There is better grip to it, yeah.
That's what it feels like. Now, I've got a funny story quickly about the PlayStation 5 controller. And this is when I realized it was the greatest controller of all time, one of the reasons. I started playing this horror game like when I first got my PlayStation 5. I can't remember the horror game. Sorry about that. But anyway, you start the game and it's just a normal game where you're just playing along. And you've got your normal thumbsticks to move and all that kind of stuff. And then we get so nothing's unusual about the controller to start with, okay? And then we get through the game. I'm probably about an hour or 2 into the game. And then all of a sudden, the controller starts making this white noise coming out of the controller thing. It freaked the crap out of me because I'm thinking that controller is possessed because I wasn't expecting like this thing to kind of happen. And I'm saying to my wife, is this actually is this the controller doing this? I couldn't work out where the noise was coming from to start with because it was just really subtle, and it was just enough to kind of make me like unsure of what was happening in this game. It's so well done that it was just like if they'd put it in there at the very start of the game, you wouldn't be expecting it and it wouldn't freak you out. But having it like an hour into the game before they started pumping through this very subtle white noise was just enough to absolutely scare the bejesus out of me, and I stopped playing the game.
now I want to know what the game. Anyone watching this, if you know what game he's talking about, leave it in the comments. I want to know what it is now. I want to play that.
It was like a picture game. Let me just think. It was something to do with like pictures or something, like an art game where you looked at different different pictures that this drawer had gone, and then you could kind of, it would just like the room would transform depending on what you did to the picture. Yeah, I'll find out. I'll get back to you on that.
All right, yeah. If you can throw that on there, I want to know that now. Yeah. What sold me on the PlayStation 5, and I heard of haptic feedback. But I never really, I just thought it was just like, another thing, another feature. All right, whatever. We'll see what that's like. One of the first PS5 games I played was Doom Eternal because I had the PS4 copy and, upgraded, and I'm playing the PS5 copy. And it looked beautiful, too. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And I get the shotgun, and I'm shooting dudes with it, and I'm like, is this controller broken? Like, it doesn't feel sticky, but it feels like it has give. Like what's going on here? My brother, he's walks in, he's like, hey, what's up, dude? And like, and he already had his PS5. He had his PS5 a year before I did, and I'm just like, I think something's wrong with my controller. And he's looking at me shooting. He says, oh no, that's the haptic feedback. And I was like, that's the haptic feedback? And he's like, yeah, if you're shooting a gun, there's give, you win with the trigger, so it makes it feel like that. And as soon as he said that, it became the coolest feature. I was like, wow. At first I was mad at it, but now I'm like, awesome. That's great. That feels good. And, it's actually funny now. Sometimes I'll play a game on, like, maybe I'll try a demo on PS5, and then I'll play it on Series X. And it's like, now there's no haptic feedback.
Yeah, there is a big difference. Haptic feedback is like the best evolution in gaming controllers.
I like. It's a very subtle thing, Mm-hmm. It's almost as subtle. Going back to the Nintendo 64 controller, one cool thing it did: the slot in the back, you could add memory cards and rumble packs. It was the first time that, like, I'm Star Fox 64. You get hit, you shoot something, your controller shakes.
Yeah,
subtle. It's one of those things that you think is just, okay, that's cosmetic. But when you see what some games do with just the vibration of the controller, whether it be finding a secret, an enemy coming close, so you walk through a room, something like activates like Alien War and your controller shakes. It's one of those things where you realize now you can't think of games without a rumble feature. And I think haptic feedback might be in that same boat.
Yeah, well, I remember analog sticks actually coming about. And so the first PlayStation 1s didn't come with analog sticks, right? Mm-hmm. They came just with the D-pad. They had the little arms that you'd hold onto with your palms, but they didn't have the analog sticks. And then PlayStation released the analog stick controller as well for PlayStation 1. Mm-hmm. And you had to actually turn on the analog sticks with a little button if you wanted to play analog. And that was like, I thought that was one of the greatest things that a gaming company done, because they didn't force it upon us. They just kind of gave it to us, and then we're like, okay, you can add this if you want to the game, and you can see how much better it is, or just go back to being the same loser you always are.
Well, what sold me on it was a video game called MDK. So one of my favorite series. Hope they come out with a third one someday. But it was the first game I played that was actually you could tell was a lot better by using analog. It was a third person, for PS1 third person game where you moved around, shot, sniped people, and there was this. I forget the actual level, but there's a level you had to make a jump. And I just remember trying it with the D-pad, and I just wouldn't hit. And I was still not sold on the analog stick. And then I did it with the analog stick, and I got it like first try. And I was like, all right, well, I guess this is how I'm going to move around now. Because even games like Mario 64, where you relied on the analog stick, that was still fairly new to me. So I was just getting used to like saying bye to the D-pad as far as movement goes.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Now, there's a problem with I talked about how bad the Xbox controller is, and this brings a problem to games. And just let me paint a picture for you. So PlayStation has got this great controller that is like state of the art, and it's got like these where you can paint on the top of it, or you've got like the sensor, it's got the 6-axis. It's got all these things that Xbox haven't included into their controller. Now, most developers will make a game based on that they're going to release it to PlayStation and Xbox. For example, Call of Duty, the bigger games like that are definitely easy to kind of see this. And they don't worry about these extra features that you can add to the controller, because why would they? It's going on both consoles, and so they make it suitable for the Xbox controller. And because the Xbox controller is worse, you don't get all these extra features from games. And it's kind of like all the consoles have to sit down and go, this is where we want the controllers to go. Let's all put these basic features into our controllers, so every game can work towards adding them features to their games. I think that would improve the gaming a lot. But until we get to that point, they basically make the games for the worst controller, and the best controllers are kind of not using all their features.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a game that like utilizes the PS5 controller the most, you're gonna have to go with a Sony game because they'll know what to do. That's really the only time where the touchpad comes into play. I mean, what games really use the touchpad? Like
No,
that not as a glorified select button.
yeah, yeah, that's 100% true. And I think like Spider-Man, you go and play your Spider-Mans, your Ratchet and Clanks and all those, and they're fantastic and they use the haptic feedback better. They do all the things better. So yeah, I'm disappointed in that part of how gamepads are. I can't think of any other really bad gamepads. I mean, there's 100
Well,
there.
yeah,
Any in the comments? We got
yeah, no, well, I like our Bucketful Games gave a shout out to the 3D controller for the Saturn, and it does look like the Voyager. He's absolutely right.
what is
It
the
does,
Voyager? What is
from
this?
Star Trek Voyager, the ship.
Oh, okay,
It looks like it looks like a smaller Enterprise, like it's kind of like more stunted. That great analogy. That is perfect. It looks like the Voyager, just like with buttons and a
You're
stick.
right.
Oh, and remember how we talked about how with the PS1 controller you had to push the stick to do analog?
Yeah.
The button, I mean. With the Saturn controller, it's an actual on-off switch, and if you turn the analog on, it turns off the D-pad.
Oh, that's perfect. You wouldn't want the D-pad and the analog stick.
No, who would play a game like that? Come on, man. Too much going on. I'm confused already. Give me back my Atari controller. No, but other than that, like really the only other place to find bad controllers would be, of course, the third partiers, your Mad Cats, your Logitechs. And honestly, for the most part, they're usually well designed. It's just that you want to talk about flimsy controllers that look like they'll break in your hand. That's what you buy.
Yeah, that's true. I think my other so Sony does it really well where they integrate features from the PlayStation controller. Nintendo does it where they force you to use their controller, and I think sometimes that takes away from the game. Sometimes they've got these cool features and they're like, hey, we're going to make you play the whole 60 hours of Zelda Skyward Sword with a motion controller, like on the Wii. You know what I mean? And you're like, but I just wanted to sit down and relax. I like the idea of this game, but you've just made me, now you're forcing me to do exercise. Like,
right, yeah. And it's tough. And I just want to say this right now. And if someone at Nintendo watches this podcast, please, it's cool that you use motion control for games like Quake 2. Mm-hmm. But if we want to play it, can you leave it off? You know, because that seems to be always what they do. Every time when they get a Switch game, that option is first on. So I'm like, why am I moving like this? And I'm like, oh, that's because the rotation's on.
Oh, yes.
And then you got to go and turn it off manually. It's just like, why? You know, we're gonna go for not having it by default. Don't give it to us unless we want it. Mm-hmm. I don't mind actually having it there. Just have the option first.
No, 100%. I went through Zelda with that. Why can't I shoot the arrows at people? And then I'm realizing, yep, okay.
Yeah, like come on.
It's
making you work.
Let's move this show along to games to movies, movies to games. We did 2 lists each. You did movies to games, and I did games to movies.
Yep. And we're going to talk about which one's better, how well they represent the movie, when it comes to music, when it comes to characters, maybe even voice acting, depending on the game. And I got my list, pretty much my top 5 movie to games, the ones that I enjoy the most, the ones I think stand out the most.
Yeah. Okay, so where is number 5? Let's start this ball rolling.
Number 5 is actually based off a movie, the first movie I ever saw in theater.
Okay.
Batman for the NES. Now, this is based off the 1989 movie, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson. It followed, if you're asking if it follows the movie, it actually followed the movie pretty well. Mm-hmm. There's little cutscenes here and there. You don't see all the stuff from the movie. It's mainly just, bad pixelated images of Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton. But the feel of the movie and the look of the movie, which is, a classic 80s Tim Burton, it nails incredibly well while adding some stuff. You fight Firefly in the game. Firefly is not in the original movie.
Oh, that's true.
It's little cool stuff like that I enjoy. That would be now. I'm not saying that's my fifth, but that's my best. Like when I think about movie-based games, you know what I mean? And I love that one. Now going on to number 4, it actually brings up a good point. Now with the Batman game, that's built to follow the movie, whereas my number 4 choice, Ghostbusters for the Genesis.
Right.
Even though it says Ghostbusters, it's actually based off a newer story.
It changes the story.
Changes the story, but there's actually a lot of enemies from the movies that you fight in this. Like you fight Stay Puft, you fight someone that looks like Gozer, things like that. Yeah, for some reason you fight the plant from Little Shop of Horrors. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Which also has Mick Rooney, which I always thought was a cool little connection. But this, I feel, even though it doesn't follow the movie well, this is the best, even better than the more modern one, which was also good. This was the best representation of that movie. The music was on point. The dialogue was all right, and you could play as all your favorite characters except Winston for reasons I don't know why. But they actually fixed it. There's a hack of this that actually includes Winston, so it's cool that got rectified. And it's always nice as a kid when you can actually get a movie that you love, but it actually comes with a game that you love too. And for a while
Did
it always
these
seemed like
come out at the same time as the movie, or what? Like around about within 6 months of?
Ghostbusters game though came out around the same time as the Ghostbusters 2 movie.
Okay.
Yeah, so it still followed. It was still, more today as well. But back then, it was explicitly just marketing.
Yeah.
A lot of these movie to games sucked. I'm not talking about any of the really crap. I'm not gonna be pulling out Blade 2 or Minority Report or anything like that. Games that are just quick cash grabs. The movie's out. Here's the game. Enjoy that. These were to me.
Are we going to ET?
We're not going to do ET,
Okay,
all right?
okay.
ET preserves its own platform. I'm not going to throw it into the list. Number 3 is actually made by the same company that made the Batman game, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Now,
Right.
Gremlins 1, Christmas classic. Intense movie, but a Christmas classic. Watch it every year around Christmas. Gremlins 2... tonally is just a very different movie than the first one. It takes place in a skyscraper, like New York City. It's not in like a little neighborhood anymore.
Yeah.
There's different characters, a whole bunch of different gremlins. Key and Peele did a great sketch on it. But even though the movie itself really wasn't as good as the sequel, as the original, this game right here, phenomenal game. It's if you like Blaster Master, it's an overhead shooter. You play as Gizmo shooting things at big tomatoes and fighting gremlins.
Yeah.
So it doesn't follow. It technically it follows the story because Gizmo is going through the building, fighting the evil gremlins. He becomes all hard and shoots arrows in both the movie and the game, which is cool. It's cool that they put in the stuff that you liked in the movie in the game. The music, on point. But that's with any Sunsoft NES game, even the bad ones. You don't see too many of the characters. You don't see Billy. You pretty much just fight the other gremlins in the game. The spider gremlin, the brainy gremlin, the girl. I think you fight the girl gremlin. I don't remember that much. But it's super fun, and I think it was a very good companion piece to a movie that admittedly needed it, because the movie really wasn't that special to me. I wouldn't watch it again. It's all right if you want your nostalgia millennial kick, but other than that, there's really not much to it. Yeah. Now, this right here, this ain't my favorite. I wouldn't say this is my favorite movie to game, but I think this is the best pulled off movie to game of all time. Warriors for the PlayStation 2.
Right.
The plot of the Warriors is there's this gang meeting between all the street gangs in New York. Because someone's trying to unite them. He dies. I'm not going to go too bit into it. He gets killed, and the Warriors, which is the street game from Coney Island, New York City, have to get back home. And they got to cross the whole city. It's nighttime, and there's a whole bunch of street gangs looking to kill them. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they got to cut through the entire thing. What this game does, though, it actually starts 3 months before the events of the Warriors movie. So you see how
Ah.
they get to you see more build on how they actually get to where they go into the meeting to, and have the events happen the way they do. And it's a whole story behind it. Like they're fighting for Coney Island, they're fighting this other gang that's not mentioned in the movie because, they defeat them. You get more fleshing out of characters that die fairly quickly in the movie.
Yeah,
The
right.
leader of the Warriors dies very early in the movie,
So I
but
wonder
in the
if they
game,
saw the movie script to make this game.
well, and I swear, like a lot of the voice actors, the game came out 25 years after the movie. The movie was 79. The game, I think, was PlayStation 2, so somewhere in the mid noughties. But
Okay.
they brought back a lot of the voice actors for that, and the music, the actual song by Joe Walsh is in the game. It plays in both the credits of the movie and the game, so it fit it so well. I remember
Right.
playing it, and I only seen the movie once as a little kid. But once I played this game, I had to watch the movie again just to absorb it because it pulled it off well to the point where I wish other games today would do it. Today, you don't see a lot of games based off a direct movie. There might be games based off movie franchises,
Yeah.
Star Wars. I know it's also books, but also Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings are based off the movies a
Hmm.
lot of times as opposed to the books. So, but they're not actually based off the movie itself. It's just the universe that the movie shares. So to see a game just nail the movie so well was awesome. It's one of my favorites. I think it pulled it off incredibly well. But my number one has to go to, I think, the most critically acclaimed. Yeah, you probably know what it is already. The most critically acclaimed game, movie to game, right here, yo. Pierce Brosnan in the flesh, GoldenEye. I mean, you got to talk about that. As far as following the movie, it actually follows it very well,
Hmm.
well enough. I mean, in the movie, the only part of the dam you ever see is Pierce just jumping off at the end, like you do the level. You're not like disabling alarms and shooting all these other dudes. But the parts that do happen in the movie are well represented in the game. And it also helps that the game's super fun. I'm not even talking about multiplayer. I'm just talking about single player following the movie. It doesn't help. It helps that it's super fun, hits all the notes, with 006's, death and betrayal
Yeah.
portrayed wonderfully in the game. Plus, you also got this awesome espionage, first-person shooter to go with it. Much like the Warriors games. The Warrior game was a beat 'em up, by the way. You fight dudes, but I mean, you could probably figure that out if because
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
gang versus gang movie. And GoldenEye, yeah, we've seen it in third person. It can work in third person. Everything or Nothing's a great game, but to just have a knockout first-person shooter for a console for a movie-based game, that's nothing short of a miracle. And people talk about today when it came out on the consoles just recently. That it was still a big hit. In fact, I think one thing we got to give a shout out. This will tie into the last subject we just talked about on the show. Yeah, I don't like the Switch controls for GoldenEye.
It
I
was
just,
it was terrible.
yeah, terrible. Oh
Oh, it
God.
was so bad. The Xbox
Xbox.
version, if you're gonna buy it today, go and get the Xbox version. It was fantastic. They redid all the cameras. They did everything to make it 10 times better.
Oh
But
yeah,
they didn't
yeah.
do anything for the Switch version. They just ported it and thank you. Goodbye.
I mean, yeah, I get why for the purist, if you will, but if I want to play old clunky Nintendo 64 controls GoldenEye, I'll do that. And I wouldn't want to put
But
that on anyone else if
why
they want to
not
play it.
have old school and then new and have different controller setups? Like it's not hard.
And they could do it. We've talked to the Pro Controller. I mean, it's a clear cut copy of it's got the 4 face buttons, the triggers, the shoulders. They could have done it, and yeah, it's not good that they didn't. Just throw it in there.
I wonder though if GoldenEye the game was bigger than the movie. I get the feeling it was.
Well, I mean, obviously James Bond itself is a franchise that needs no explanation. But if we're talking about single movie, we're just talking about that. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know how a James Bond fan who doesn't play video games sees GoldenEye. I really don't know where it follows into that because it was just such an impactful video game to me that I love the movie. Like
Yeah.
I love watching GoldenEye because it reminds me of the game. I'm thinking of the game before I'm even thinking of the movie.
Yeah,
So I really don't know.
Yeah, I think of the game before the movie too. When I see GoldenEye, I think of the game, and that's why I wonder if the game was more popular than the movie. Like I feel like it's. I'll have to Google later on if it was more.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie was popular because it was the first one with Pierce Brosnan. He just taken over from Timothy Dalton. So that little curiosity of a new James Bond, and people knew Pierce Brosnan from like Remington Steele. So
Yeah.
he wasn't. It wasn't like. I mean, I think he was better known than Daniel Craig, who I just knew from Layer Cake. When he took over the role of Bond. So I think it was a modest hit. It probably was number one. Probably made its money back. Probably did, and it was well reviewed. But compared to the game,
Killed it.
no, the game killed it. Yeah, more people played the game than I think saw the movie, or put more hours into playing the game than they saw the movie.
So you gave me a challenge to try and think of a movie that would make a really good game. And I thought this would be like really easy. And I just started like, I Googled this, like I thought Bad Boys would make a really good game. They've already done that. However, but there's a lot of really, really bad video games made from games because sadly, a lot of them are just reskins and it's not really fair to kind of rate them as a video game. They're just reskins for money grabs. I mean, one game that I thought was actually okay as a movie to video game was the Mad Max game. I thought that was actually done really quite well. But at the same time, that was really just Rage 3 or whatever it was, because it was the ID software that they just reused that pretty much the whole Rage thing and added Mad Max characters and Mad Max story. So it wasn't really a fair swap over. Anyway, so my movie to game, I think would be quite fun. It would be 13 Ghosts, the movie. It's an old horror movie, probably like, 2000 something or other.
Yeah.
And
Tony Shalhoub, Matthew Lillard. Yep.
Yeah, it was a kind of a really fun movie that had some puzzles in it and some horror kind of scenes. I just could see it being a really fun game from a first person point of view. But
what it could be, it'd be like a puzzle game, like in the same way that like the Room games, where you're okay, because that's what 13 Ghosts was based on, was the traps, the rooms that would just like murder you. It was Saw before Saw.
Yeah.
Except because it actually had the ghost and stuff like that. I think that'd be great. It'd be a nice puzzle game.
And scary.
The fears would, because you'd have to be careful of the ghosts too, because they're coming after you. That would be, I could see it also, you couldn't, it wouldn't be a game where you could fight enemies, but I could see it having kind of like an Eternal Darkness vibe, playing with your head in a way. That'd be nice for if I were to make that movie into a game, that's what I would probably go with.
I think
so. I would include the part where the guy gets sliced in half down the middle. That part's cool.
Yeah, 100%. If you've got a movie you turn into a game, put that in the comments too. But I got the challenge of make the best games that made it into movies, and I thought this would be easy also. However, there's not that many of them. There's nowhere near as many as there is movies that have gone into games. So going this way there's only about somewhere probably about 50 kind of thing. So it was actually hard to narrow down my favorites, but I've kind of cheated on my list, and I'll explain that as we get going. But my number 5 game to movie would be Doom. I just thought they did that quite well. I thought it was a pretty fun movie. It kind of could have been a little bit scarier, a bit more evil, but all in all, it wasn't a bad movie. It wasn't the worst movie I've ever seen.
Well, like one thing I had not so much against, I love the first person part in Doom when that happens, and I'm a fan of Carl Urban. I'm a fan of The Rock. It's just that the fact that they weren't Hellbeast, I thought it was an unnecessary change. change. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it still kept the feeling, but it just I don't know. It
It
almost
could
felt
have
like it
been
wasn't Doom.
gorier, a bit more
Had they
blood, a bit more. Yeah.
That's one of those movies. If that movie wasn't called Doom, I think it would have been more well received.
Yes,
You know?
100%. So that was the start of there. Then I've got number 4. I've got an equal fourth place of 2 games, and that was only because they were my first experience of seeing these games that had turned into movies. Street Fighter, the movie, in the 1994 version of that, and Super Mario Bros. 1993 version.
All right, now
Yeah, they were good solid movies. Now, I would like everyone to understand though that Super Mario Bros. 1993 was competing with the live action Ninja Turtles movie at the time, which killed it. It absolutely killed it at that time. And when the Mario Brothers movie came out, it had this very similar vibe. And I think people were like, I'd rather go and see Ninja Turtles kind of thing with it. It was a good movie without being a great movie. But I much preferred Street Fighter at this time, even though that movie was rated terribly low. I don't know. I was into all the martial art movies around that era, and like Kylie Minogue. Who could not like a movie with Kylie Minogue in it?
oh
Like,
yeah, she will always be Cammy.
yeah,
She is Cammy forever. In the same way that you're not gonna now that Raul Julia's gone, we just can't have another M Bison. I can't think of anyone else that's M Bison but him.
and also Nicolas Cage. Sorry, not Nicolas Cage. John Claude Van Damme. He played Johnny K. What was he playing in
Guile.
Yes, he
Colonel
played
Guile.
that. Yeah, he played that really well too. I thought that was there was some really good casting in that movie. So that's why I remember it fondly.
And that's the thing too. You can crap on the OG Mario Brothers movie, and you can crap on the Street Fighter movie, and I get it. You know, the acting is stiff.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the best paced movies, but it just seemed like one of those movies where people were like, they were giving it their all, even though they really weren't. A lot of both these movies actually did have problems in production. I mean, with the Mario movie, it was just like no one knew what they were doing. And of course, with Street Fighter, I think either it got exasperated or it started, but JCVD was really like starting to do drugs and like kind of going down that path, which was terrible because I was always entertained with his work. Having said that, though, I think it's kind of unfair the bad rap those movies have, especially Super Mario Brothers. I think Street Fighter has come around. People dig Street Fighter more than they do the Mario Brothers movie, and you are right in comparing them together, just because they were that same time of Hollywood being like, okay, this video game thing ain't going away. It's going to be a franchise. How can
they
we
were
make
the
money
first? They were kind of the first ones out of the blocks. Really, the first games to movies were these 2 movies, and they set the scene for how all games. So I had to kind of include them, even though they weren't the greatest of movies. They made the genre kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, like, in a way, I would say that the Mario movie 2023 owes to the original one, because even if it just showed them what not to do, it still showed them it. They still learn that, you know what I mean? They learn, okay, let's not do that, let's do this instead. Sometimes you really gotta
make something.
You gotta fail. You gotta fail. You gotta F up. Sometimes you're your best at your worst. And once you do something, then you can learn from it. Because if you just keep, knocking hit after hit after hit, you don't really learn anything. You learn from your mistakes.
Okay, well, I'll add my notable admission right now, because you've just said the Mario movie. I couldn't include that because I haven't actually seen it, so that's why it's not in the list. Okay, so
no, I mean, but that's fine too. But and I get that. I loved it. I saw it twice. Once with my niece, one with my nephew. But I wouldn't include that either just yet, because the movie, even I think right now the movie hasn't settled, even though it's out on Blu-ray, streaming, all that. It hasn't gotten the proper analysis where we can compare it to the rest of the movies. Give it a year, if that, just a little bit time, because I know other video game movies have come out fairly recently that will be on this list. But yep, Street Fighter, awesome. Super Mario Bros. Movie '93. I like Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
Yes.
So number 3, I put in Uncharted the movie. Now, I am an absolute massive Uncharted games fan. I played all of them. Except the first one kind of is really quite a bit weird, and I think they learnt from that with the alien things at the end. But after that, we kind of got going with the Uncharted series, and it became a really, really fun series and really good adventure type of things. And the Uncharted movie is kind of almost a throwback to the Indiana Jones type movies. It's got that kind of feel to it. And I just really, really enjoyed the movie as well. I thought the casting was a tiny bit off, but besides that, I really enjoyed the action sequences. And they did play some of my favorite scenes from the actual game into that as well.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've played Uncharted's 1 through 4. Great games too.
Yeah.
It was, it was Uncharted came out during that time between the Tomb Raider games, between like Tomb Raider Age of Darkness and, the 2010, 2011 reboot. So, I think it filled in that gap of the adventuring, jumping up here. One thing I always love about Uncharted, and a lot of games do it, is when you enter a big room and it just like shows you the room and you got to get up there, how you got to do it, like that kind of stuff, which is just that awesome, flowing. Of course, the control, by the time Uncharted 1 came out, now the controls and camera and all that stuff were competent to the point where you could actually control your character or feel like you control your character.
But also the panoramic views that Uncharted gave you with unlike anything that Tomb Raider had ever done as well. I think like from a cinematic point of view, Uncharted series of games really showed off the capabilities of the PlayStation 3 through to the PlayStation, 5. They just looked more amazing than I can ever remember Tomb Raider looking back then, and I think it almost made Tomb Raider wake up and go, hey, we have to get good now, because there's a genuine competitor in the games.
And the way you say with cinematics, I mean, I'm sure I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it lended itself very well to movies. What would you say it follows, though? Do you think it follows Uncharted 1, 2? As far does it have one of those plots, or does it have its own plot? Like, is it Nathan Drake doing his own thing?
It's kind of a little bit like they've got your favorite scenes out of 1, 2, and 3, like all the movies, and then they throw them into it, and it's. I think it's kind of more like an Uncharted 2, Uncharted 3 kind of plot type of thing, but it's kind of It's got its own plot, but it's stealing its favorite moments from the games as well. So
probably the best way to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm pretty sure it does that. I've got to think back to the movie. Like the thing where he climbs up through the train carts. Like that was like one of my.
Yeah, that's how part 2 begins.
Yeah. Yeah, it does things like that. That I'm pretty sure I haven't seen it for a while now. Now I'm trying to jog my memory. But yes, it's definitely definitely like. I think in number 2, you know how you go to that fancy place, the auction house, and they're all dressed up really nice and whatever, and he does that kind of. There's that scene in there too, but the scene plays out differently to the game. So they've kind of got the scene, but then they play it out differently to how the game does it. So you don't know what's going to happen as much, if that makes sense. So I like that part. I'm going to kind of have to go and watch this again. Let's go to number 2. Number 2, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the movie. And I just like Sonic for me was great on Sega, depending on which country you're in. And the Sonic was great. It was just fun. And I didn't know how they were going to turn that into an enjoyable movie. Because it's so fast and frenetic, and he doesn't have. They've kind of added the perfect persona to Sonic in these movies with this like cocky teenage kid hedgehog, and that's what makes the movie so good. Like there's these great action sequences where he can just outrun everything and do this and that. And then there's some great things where he's abusing his powers to go and get like some more snacks from the local supermarket by using his ring to reach through and grab those snacks so he doesn't have to travel all the way down there. And I just loved. Yeah, and I didn't even know that Jim Carrey would make the best bad man in the world, but what he does in that movie, it's just fantastic.
He owns it. He owns it. I was skeptical at first. I love Jim Carrey. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, as Robotnik Eggman, I couldn't see it. And like in part one, within the first couple minutes, I was like, yes, he is Robotnik. I can't think of anyone as not being Robotnik. And not just him though. What really like almost made me not watch the Sonic movies was the fact that there was live action characters. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh.
Well, and we need to point out that this was one of the craziest things I've ever seen a movie do, where they released a trailer for Sonic 1 and everyone said how ugly Sonic looked. He looked absolutely terrible. So they went back and remastered every single cartoon to make it look more like the character. And it was kind of one of those, it was almost like something that would happen to a game where they release a game and everyone goes, oh, this is terrible. And then they add some bug fixes and all of a sudden everyone loves that game. And it was like so iconic of what a game would do. So,
and you got to give it to the makers of the movie too for doing that. I mean, it was the right call.
Yeah,
I was one of the people that was like, that's what Sonic's gonna look like. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
But the fact they could have easily just said, no, that's gonna be Sonic.
Yeah.
And they could have released it. They could have done that. How it would have changed the box office numbers, we'll never know. But I thought what they did was the correct thing to do. Although I'll say this, I never actually checked my Blu-ray of Sonic the Hedgehog. It'd be interesting if they released a version of it that had the original design. Just as an optional thing. Cool. I'd watch it. Yeah, I'd watch it just to see it.
But I think
Sonic 2 came out. It was like, okay, this is what we're gonna look like.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So, so I went with Sonic 2 because Sonic 1 was a good solid movie, but then Sonic 2 just took it to another level, and I just thoroughly enjoyed that game, that movie. Yeah, Knuckles was great. The story was great. Like you kind of, I don't know, it was just perfectly set out, and yeah, I've watched it so many times just because of how good it was. So that's why number 2.
It's a good one. Now what's number 1?
Number 1 is all the Tomb Raider movies. I couldn't decide, because I like both of them for different reasons. I love the Tomb Raider, I'm obviously Uncharted Tomb Raider fan, and I thought back when they announced they were going to make a Tomb Raider movie initially, the first couple of movies, I thought the only person that could play that would be Angelina Jolie. And yeah, and she was just perfect at it. She was the ultimate Tomb Raider. You could not expect anyone else to be Tomb Raider.
They were classic, but I always hoped that they would come out with more with her, honestly. She did it so well. She
did it so well. And for the original games, she was perfect. I really enjoyed what she did with all of that type of stuff. It was, and it kind of resembled the games a lot. They'd go into this tomb and there would be a mechanical thing in there that just, you knew that it was fake as anything. But that's what was perfect about it, because it was just as true to the game as it could be. And I really enjoyed that part.
Yep, the soundtrack was pretty banging too, if I remember it correctly. Yeah, it was definitely one of those, a very sleek movie, as it should have been. The video games was designed to be very sleek and smooth. Maybe not so much in the control section anymore, but as far as the overall veneer, very stylized and shiny. And I think the first 2 movies hit that well. I'm not gonna lie, I have not seen the new one yet. I heard good things about it though. I heard the new Tomb Raider the new movie was actually.
What do you think of the new Tomb Raider games?
I love them. Okay, so the first in the trilogy of the new ones.
Yeah,
I love that one. That's the one game to me, and I know maybe some people will disagree with it, but to me, when I play that game, I think Arkham Asylum, but with guns. Because it's almost that same thing, how you move around the island and you
Yeah.
find these secrets, stuff like that. I mean, they might as well be Riddler.
I think that's a very good analogy. I feel like if you go into it, because see, Tomb Raider initially was the idea of that you're traveling the world, picking up these bits and pieces, and then they condense it down to one map, and that's what Tomb Raider became. And everyone was like, "Oh, you can't do that with Tomb Raider. She goes everywhere," and that was kind of the bad part about it. Now the movie follows that first game in the new trilogy quite heavily, and it's just really gritty and raw, like how they made the game where she's pulling sticks out of her arms and things like that. Like a real Castaway kind of feel to it, that like so, and sometimes you look at the little girl that's playing, like she's a young lady, I should say, but she's quite small in stature, and she, like, to think of her making it through this movie is, they make it seem real enough that she could do it and that could be the hero. So I loved that part about it, and she did play the role really well. I'm not sure if she's the voice actor in the new one, in the new games or not, but if she isn't, she's got the same voice. So,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I'm definitely going to try to check it out, because I love the original Angelina Jolie's, but they definitely seem like different movie series, though, in the same way that the new Tomb Raider seems like different than the old Tomb Raiders.
Yes, no, that's 100% right. So, but I couldn't split them. I was going to put Tomb Raider, like the old Tomb Raiders, and I'm like, but the new Tomb Raider movie is so good, and I just feel like we'll just bundle them all together, and that's what we ended up with. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I cheated.
No, that's fine. I totally respect that. Now, you gave me a challenge.
Yes.
When you wanted to know what game that I want to see come to fruition as a movie.
Yes.
And in a way, I'm kind of cheating with this, because the game that I'm going to mention is actually the movie rights for it are owned, and not only owned, in this part you might go, ugh, they're actually owned by Disney. But but Disney does have the rights to the Mega Man series to publish a Mega Man movie. Now, that comes with some, hesitation, but I just love Mega Man so much that even if they didn't, that would be my number one. I don't care if it was an anime. I don't care if it was a live action. I would love to watch a movie based off Mega Man. That would be my number one thing, because you got so many crazy characters, all the bosses, Woodman, Cutman, Centaur Man. These are all people you fight in these games. To see that on the big screen, to me, would be, if they could do it like they did the Mario movie, and just streamline the plot, just make it, boy built by it's more or less Pinocchio, but with a laser cannon, and just it would be so cool.
I'm a little bit scared for you, because if it was a live action thing, I could see it turning into almost a RoboCop type of movie.
Right, yeah. I mean, but I'm just so in love with the franchise. Even if it was a bad kitty RoboCop, I'd still just be full board.
You'd be the only person. Yes, thank you. Make more. More.
I'd be in that theater. All right, with the helmet on, because of course I'm going to dress up while I'm going to go see it. I don't care. I wonder if it's Disney. At most, it'll be computer animated. If not, I mean, they're probably not going to hand draw it, because they don't do that anymore. Pixar might touch it, but I just hope when and if the Mega Man movie does come to fruition, if it does come to fruition, because they might not, they might just sit on it. But I hope I do get to see it at some point. If I'm going to go with a movie series, because that was a little bit of a cheat since it's kind of optioned, I don't believe this one is optioned, but I think they could do a Half-Life series. And plus, if they did Half-Life movie, you could actually hear Gordon Freeman talk for the first time, depending on who plays him.
No, how good would it be they did the whole movie and not have him talk?
Just as a joke, every time he's about to talk, Eli says something. Because people talk. People got to get used to this. People are clamoring for a Zelda movie. If they do a Zelda movie, Link's got to talk.
Yes.
He's got to have to talk. So,
And
and he's like, he's one of the more famous silent protagonists. So if he's got to talk, let's have Gordon Freeman talk.
Yeah, I know. So that's going to be interesting. Now, I would like to do a notable shout out to some movies that I thought do video game really well, like Pixel, the movie, the one with Adam Sandler and that, where they have to fight off all the old video games. Also, Player One was another one that comes to mind that was really
a good movie.
Really good movie.
Too.
Yeah.
Very good book. Well,
so there are other movies that have kind of incorporated a whole heap of video games into one movie, and then that's made a really fun movie as well. And I think they're almost better in some ways than the ones that are just about one character or one game.
The OG of that. Some people say Tron's the OG of that, and Tron's great. I love Tron, but you got to give the shout out to The Wizard.
Right.
You know, the story about a young boy going to the Nintendo Championships, to compete, to play, and like it's like it's soaked in video game culture, but it's soaked in 80s video game culture because it was the 80s. And just like little tiny things. This is a movie trope that I hate. I always call it bowing. That's why I'll call it with my friend. There's a scene in the movie where Christian Slater and Beau Bridges, their father and son in the movie, they're staying at the hotel because they're trying to catch up to, his brother, his son. And they're staying at the hotel, they're bored. So he goes to the truck that they're in, and they pull out of the truck in the back their NES.
Oh.
That they just have on a flatbed. You know what I mean? It's just there. Imagine if you're just driving and your PS5's just in the back. So he hooks it up and he goes, "What are you gonna play?" And my best Christian Slater impersonation, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They're playing the original Turtles, which is one of the hardest, most pain in the butt games. Download on Cowabunga Collection if you want. It stinks. So the joke is he's playing it and Beau Bridges is like, "Oh, you kids and your games," and he goes to bed. Then later on, Christian Slater wakes up and he sees Beau Bridges, and he's playing like this. All right, he's playing a game, Teenage Ninja Turtles, the game that like demands precise control,
like this,
like that, not dying, beating the game. It's just one of the most, like. As a kid, like if you watch it, you'd be like, even as a kid, I was like, that's not how you play Turtles. What are you doing, man? You're not like you're not playing a shooter game.
You're not kidding no one. Yeah.
No, sorry, Beau Bridges, you messed up.
Oh, that's pretty true.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you have got any comments, add that. Do some liking and subscribing and all of those type of things. I think we're about done for the week. Is there any comments or anything we needed to throw in the mix of things?
No, just that, like, I think my original thing where I hope we see more direct movies to games, because you really don't see that anymore. It's just a franchise. It was always fun. It's hard now because a game can be a movie, you can have the acting, you can have the cinematography, you can have the growth. Some games are glorified movies like Beyond Two Souls and Indigo Prophecy and stuff like that, and not to mention like the Telltale games where all you do is just move your character around. Other than that, it plays out just like a movie. So with the line kind of blurring, I think the day of the straight movie to game is done. But thanks to movies like the Mario Brothers movie, I think the game to movies are just beginning, and I think they're going to get even better than they are now.
Well, in that case, let's sign out and hope that we get some more. Until next week, and when there's probably going to be 6 games to movies made because of this podcast, we will talk to you guys